I warmly welcome you all to this leadership lecture series, A Career in Research, It Is Not a Passe, by Dr. Anand Shivasubramaniam. Dr. Anand Shivasubramaniam is a distinguished professor of computer science and engineering at Penn State. He received his BTech from IIT Madras and MS and PhD degrees, all in computer science from Georgia Tech. He has been at Penn State since 1995, where he has spearheaded several research projects in high-performance computing, energy-efficient computer system design, sustainable data centers, and using computing for tackling sustainability issues on a broader scale, including building energy management, renewable energy integration, and efficient water distribution for utilities. He is also a research and development consulting advisor for Tata Consultancy Services on many of these topics. Apart from an NSF Career Award, he has received 3 Google Research Awards, 3 IBM Faculty Awards, and a HP Innovation Award. He is an IEEE Fellow and a ACM Distinguished Scientist. I request you all to join me in welcoming Dr. Anand Shivasubramaniam.
Thank you for that kind introduction. It's an honor and a nostalgic feeling for me to come back here and be, for a change, on the other side of the audience, right? I'm sat in my days, there was this building didn't exist, it was more the CLT, but it gives me very nostalgic feelings. So, sometime in, I think January, Professor Nag sent me an email saying, now that you become distinguished prof, you should come to IIT and give a talk, right? I said, fine. I didn't even think twice about it. I said, I'll do that. Then a couple of weeks back, I wrote to the Office of Alumni Affairs and saying, what kind of things should I talk about, right? See, I'm a prof. I can talk technically for days on end without, thinking two hoots, without thinking anything if it's a technical subject, right? But then, if it's a technical subject, I don't know how much audience will be interested in the technical subject that I'm going to cover. So I was sort of skeptical and I wrote to them saying, what should I talk about? They said something non-technical, right? And that sort of threw me off because I have no clue what to talk about. Right? Then what did I do? I went to this leadership lecture series webpage to see what all talks have happened in the last year or two. Right? And I noticed almost every other talk is about being an entrepreneur and starting a company and so on. Right? So I thought I should do something different. Right? So I thought, let me talk about research. Right? And why you should do research. Because I am seeing an alarming trend, I think we should all take note of this and do something about it. So this research that I'm going to talk about, it is intended for all of those in t-shirts here. Right? I remember my IIT days. It is for the nude Archimedes who ran on the street, or for the suited Professor Calculus, right? So it doesn't matter what the spectrum is. Research is an important issue for all of you to consider. So let's start with what is research, right? Everyone sort of, if you open this word or if you just talk about it, people think, oh, he's a geek. Right? Or he is a very highly learned, erudite person and so on. So if you really look at the dictionary definition of this word research, it just means the process of investigating or finding out something, right? And I think Einstein captured this very well in this famous quote that, it is the act of doing something, right? And many times you don't know what you're doing, right? So the very fact that you are establishing new things or drawing new conclusions, and the process of doing it is what is called research, and the fact that it's new means there's nothing passe about it. So we can close this talk and be done with it, right? So what made me pick this topic? Okay. So I was in IIT between 1985 and 89, and I just wanted to give a roadmap of what was the career path of an engineer in those days, right? So after high school, everyone went through the slog of studying for the JEE and then getting to a top tier institution like an IIT. And then I would say 90% or 80 to 90% went abroad, right? And the way you go abroad is not by taking a job, but by actually joining an academic institution, right? For a master's or a PhD. And then after a master's or PhD, some people think you are overqualified. What do? Either you become a faculty member or you join an industry R&D kind of position, right? There were some who, after academic, the IIT went directly to the job, okay? And even there, not just the numbers were few, the kinds of jobs that they went for was quite different from the kinds of jobs that many of the IITians are going to today. So what is different today? This path is no longer the majority, it's a minority, okay? A bulk of the people are either taking up jobs or they are doing startups. There's nothing wrong with startups, but I just want you to keep this in mind that note that the startups and jobs doesn't necessarily have to be done immediately after your IIT. There's other things you could do before you go there. So here are some numbers to prove the point, okay? I know data from my batch, CS, okay? Our batch of CS was less than 20 students. I think there were 18, okay, 17 or 18. And all but a couple went for graduate study abroad, and all but one did a PhD. So if you look at it, I think 15 of the 20, or 18, 19 students did a PhD, okay? This year, I was at IIT Bombay a couple of weeks back. I heard that 4 people applied for higher studies, okay? And IIT Madras, again, someone else told me, this was actually Professor Jeff Ullman. I don't know how much of this is true. This is only heard through the grapevine. Only one person applied, right? This is a stark contrast, right? And remember that the number of undergraduate students has only grown. It's become 4 times or 4 to 5 times than what it was in my days, right? Why this trend? What has changed? Well, there are many more career options today. Why? Well, in those days, India used to be called an underdeveloped country, right? It is no longer an underdeveloped country. There is a vibrant entrepreneurial spirit, culture, and support. Just like I said, the number of talks that you guys listen to, it sort of gives a good indication of how many people want to be entrepreneurs, right? Even if you're not an entrepreneur, you want to join a well-established company, salaries have gone through the roof, right? And it is both the Indian companies and the multinationals who are operating here. And finally, I think this is another important issue that we need to keep in mind, that students have self-induced pressure to take a job, right? It may be either because they look at their neighbor and see a salary of 30 lakhs and they feel that they have to be in the same boat, right? Or it could be that I spent 7 years studying for my JEE and then I'm at a point where I better recoup some of the investments I've made, right? So any of these kinds of reasons induce a lot of people to take up a job as soon as possible. So let's look at why R&D is needed in the first place, right? There are a lot of studies, whether within a company or across at the national level, which have shown that there's a positive correlation between how much R&D you invest in, how much R&D you do, and the corresponding revenues for the company or the GDP growth and so on. So you can Google and look at all these things, right? So R&D is very critical at the national scale. It is also critical for the academic and the departments like institutions like IITs and different kinds of institutions out there. And many of these R&D jobs need to be filled by PhDs and masters, okay? I'll again get to this reason of why we need a PhD or master very soon. And here is another thing that people may not have realized. Increasingly, you find there are non-conventional career options for PhDs, right? So, for instance, as a professor, I get cold calls from lawyers all the time, right? What do I have to do with a lawyer? The lawyer wants to call me as an expert witness in a lot of these patent trials. And they pay very, very well, right? And they want a PhD for it. They will not, even if you are the very smart like B.Tech, they won't call you, right? Same way, if you actually look at Wall Street, right? There are a lot of PhDs who are doing algorithmic trading for many of these big name firms. Right? And increasingly, there is also things which are happening in the entertainment space, right? In fact, I met a faculty member who actually is looking at how to make photos like art, right? And there's a lot of research that goes on into this. And he feels that this is going to be the next wave of art, about how to use artificial intelligence to create art, right? Can you think about it? So let me point to how important PhDs are. Okay, here is a study. I think this is very, very interesting, and I came across this a couple of years back, and I just wanted to point this out. See, one way of looking at how good an academic department is by seeing how many of your graduates are at other academic institutions, right? Because if you are good, they will hire all those people elsewhere. So this is a chart of how many undergraduates have come from a particular institute and they have actually subsequently taken on a faculty job at one of the top 50 academic institutions. Okay? And this is for computer science, and they take the top 50 academic institutions in the US. Right? So, if you want to read this, MIT, of course, is at the top of the list. 117 of its undergraduates are faculty members at one of the other top 50 academic institutions, right? This is undergraduates. So, MIT is way up there. Next comes Harvard and Cornell and so on. See what is number 5 on this list? IIT Madras. Right? Something to be proud about. And note that this is only one of the IITs. You add up IIT Madras, IIT Kanpur is number 7, right? IIT Bombay is roughly like 11th or 12th or something. You add these up, we actually exceed MIT. Right? There's something to be proud about. So, apart from faculty members where you just don't get hired at a good institution if you have a PhD, similarly, R&D in industry is even more critical, right? So, any company, right, you need to do R&D to innovate, right? Note that I have taken a controversial view and put Apple up there, okay? You may say, oh, Apple is a very innovative company. I would say it was very innovative till 7 years back. Right? If I look at it today, what are they doing? They are doing iPhone 7, right? Which is a little better than iPhone 6, which was a little better than iPhone 5 and so on, right? Maybe they did the watch, but it didn't quite go there. So they are innovative, all right, but they are not quite there, right? But if they don't do an iPhone 7, they cannot keep selling an iPhone 6 for the next 5 years, right? I mean, the only reason they did well fairly this year was because the Samsung had all these problems. Right? There is another reason you want to do R&D, because in large companies, there are a lot of inefficiencies, right? I mean, the way you do something, this assembly line is not exactly right, you want to do something different, the way you want to source from your suppliers is different. These are all for manufacturing companies. Even in software industry, there's a lot of inefficiencies you can find about how you deliver software and so on, right? So doing this constantly, even though the market doesn't need it, is good for you, right? And if you really look at what has happened with Uber and Ola the last few days, it was a market which did not exist. They created a new market, right? And of course, even if we already have something, you just want to keep on improving it so that you can dominate over everyone. And Google is a very good example of that. There's just no competition for Google in terms of search. So a lot of people use the term research and innovation somewhat interchangeably, right? And again, you go to the dictionary and look at these two terms. Innovation is a new product, new method, a new apparatus that you're coming out with, or a new service that you're coming up with. Research is the process of coming to that, right? It's a systematic methodology of getting to there. So you may come up with a one-off innovation, right? But if you don't have a regular process, a systematic process of coming to innovations, you'll be a one-off player, right? So good companies innovate, but great companies do research to innovate, right? So what's the different kinds of research? And I picked two extremes. There are a lot of several grades in between, right? Just to understand what are the issues involved in this, right? So one is the academic model, right, which you are all sort of familiar with in some form or the other. And then the other end is the industry R&D, right? So here are some of the attributes you can compare these on. First is, what kinds of things do you research on? What is the problem? Right? What do academics pick to work on? It's something which is intellectually challenging. I don't care if it is going to be useful for someone, right? I just like it because it's a cool thing to do, right? Finding the next prime number is very important for me. I don't care who uses it, right? That's fine. It's intellectually challenging, right? It may be based on long-term trends, right? So, for instance, if let's say suddenly it becomes some 128-bit cryptography gets cracked tomorrow, right? I want to do something based on that, right? So it's based on what is happening in the technology evolution. The same thing you can also say that in another 3 to 5 years, driverless cars are going to be a reality, right? So if driverless cars come, then what kind of research should I do to target customer experience inside the car? So that is based on the technology, that evolution that has happened. On the other hand, if you look at industry, the problems they usually pick are based on what the customer wants, right? Note that what the customer wants may be for today, it may be for 3 months from now, they may be for 2 years from now, maybe 5 years from now. But it's very difficult to justify a budget in industry to accommodate research which is 25 years from now, or which may not have a practical impact at all. Right? In terms of timelines, invariably academic research is upwards of 5 years. In fact, it may be 20 years, 25 years. If you, for instance, look at quantum computing and so on, you're talking about upwards of 20, 30 years. Okay. On the other hand, in industry, they work on almost a quarterly basis. It can range anywhere from 3 months to at the most like something like 5 years. Right. So this is one of the drivers behind why do research. For the academic, why are they doing research? Well, I want to write more papers, I want to get more awards, I want my citation index to be very high. These are all very quantifiable parameters that all the profs try to target, right? One of the very, very important reasons why an academic does research is to actually produce good students, right? Note that there's no satisfaction better than actually producing the best students who go out and make a name for themselves. Right? So HR development or the human resource that gets developed as a consequence of the research is a very, very important output metric. On the other hand, in industry, people are looking at patents. How many patents do I have? So when two companies are fighting with each other, each of them goes armed with a stack of patents and says, my stack is bigger than yours, so you better pay me, right? They may not even look within the details of the patent. Differentiators, and of course, they are looking for revenue at the end of it. So here are some types of innovation that goes on in industry. I borrowed this slide from both this Clay Christensen's book, some of this is there, and also the innovation process that is followed within TCS, for which I am an R&D advisor. So I just want to briefly talk about this. So there are 3 kinds of innovation that normally happens in a company. The first is what is called the derivative innovation, where you have a current business. I keep selling something. I want to slightly improve it. I want to target a larger audience. I want to use that to, reach out to more people. Or what I manufacture or what I sell, I want to do it more efficiently. Okay? So that is what is called the derivative innovation. There is what is called the platform innovation, where I'm going to somehow change something which is going to start yielding me more results over time. Okay? So we build new platforms. So it is not as straightforward as this. It may involve much more effort, but it is not a radical change from how my company operates. The third kind of innovation is what is called the disruptive innovation, which Clay Christensen coined. As the name implies, it is like I'm doing completely different tomorrow, right? What Google is doing in terms of search, suddenly it does the driverless cars, or it does a lunar mission, right? It has nothing to do with the rest of the company. Note that it's not necessary that R&D should focus here or here or here. It spans the entire spectrum, right? So when you get your PhD and join a company, you can contribute across this entire space. It doesn't need to be just, many people have this misconception that they fall only in this space. Okay? It doesn't have to be. So what kind of research should you do, right? I have used an example in a domain which I know, which is computer science, okay? And just to give you an illustration of this, the action is in interdisciplinary research, right? So if you take computing itself today, we can improve the hardware some more, we can improve the memory capacity some more, we can build a new piece of software, you can consume lower power, you can store more things, you can analyze bigger data, all of those kinds of things. But working within here has, first of all, only so much impact, right? Secondly, it is not really, a big step forward or intellectually challenging that much, right? So the action, on the other hand, is happening at the intersection of this with a lot of other domains. Okay, let me just illustrate. If you take life sciences, right? Know that the whole area of computational biology, bioinformatics, and so on is all about how to do, find genes for this, use that for specialized medicine targeting individual genomes and all those kinds of things, right? A lot of it not just happens in the wet labs, but in online. Okay. Same way, if you look at social, people are looking at computing as a way of analyzing and understanding people and affecting behavioral change in people, right? All this, how do you, convince someone? I find 3 friends of them on Facebook and influence them, and that influences you in some way, form or the other, right? Smarter manufacturing. This whole area of Internet of Things, right? Everything gets connected. So your entire supply chain, your entire set of machinery on the shop floor, and your customers get connected. How do you use that to intelligently order parts, move parts across the assembly line and so on? So again, the computing and communications are very, very critical for this. In fact, there's an industrial Internet of Things that is coming up. Education, right? If you move forward 20 years, people even question, will there be universities? Right? Will there be physical classrooms anymore? Right? Will there be lectures like this? The online platform with all these Coursera, Udacity and all these kinds of things are transforming the way people looking at education. How can technology change this entire, not just delivering of the content, but evaluating how you have delivered it and figuring out how much you understood from it. Materials. The whole area of nanotechnology is very, very tied to the kind of computer advancements that where you can look at rich databases of what material properties are and use that to specifically make some material for this door of a car or a handle of a car. Okay? And even in economics and finance, right? So Google hires a lot of PhDs in economics. Why? Any idea? Where do they make the money from? Ads, right? So in fact, they use a lot of auctions and bidding and all these kinds of things to fill their ad space. And how to price these ads is something the economists are contributing to. So a whole deal of computer scientists are working in the economics field. So let me come back to this point of what is a PhD, right? What I want to do is what it is not, and then talk about what it is. See, everyone thinks, like I said, PhD means you are a geek. You know a lot of different things. You know you are the techno-Greek, you know all these things, and you are the smartest guy. Okay? Please remove this misconception. It does not mean you are the smartest guy. It does not mean you know a lot of different things. Okay? So the way I look at a PhD is almost like a medical license, right? So when you want to become a doctor, you go through an MBBS or MD and so on, right? What is that? It is giving you a license to practice, right? So the PhD is actually giving you a license to practice, right? And what does this license certify, right? It is certifying that you are mastered the process. Remember the word process, right? It's mastered the process of identifying a problem, right? Picking something you want to work on. There are hundreds and thousands of things to look in the world, to solve in the world, right? I want to cure cancer. I want to do this. I want to do it, right? You can pick a lot of different problems, but whether you will be able to solve it based on your resources, your abilities, and so on, is something that you have to seriously think about when you're identifying a problem. You understand? So, how do you identify this problem? Finding out what all has been done about it, right? You cannot just say, I Googled, I found this problem, Wikipedia tells me this is what has been done, I'm done, right? That's going to be woefully inadequate. Note that, you have to spend months, years maybe, understanding everything that has been done about it. In fact, at the end of it, you should know more about it than anyone else in the world, right? But note it's about that one problem. It's not about thousands of different things. Right? You should know everyone who has contributed something or the other about that problem. Coming up with alternate ways of addressing the problem, right? So this is where the creativity part comes in, right? All the different other players who have done things in the space, what is their drawback, right? Why do you think you have a better way of addressing this problem? So that is a very important issue. After that, just saying that my approach is better is not going to cut it. You have to prove it, right? And the proof is either experimental or theoretical proof or some way. You need to make a very, very convincing argument to others. And finally, this is perhaps the most important, articulation. Okay? I find that many people are very smart, they do a lot of creative things, but at the end of it, they're not able to sell what they do. Right? It's very, very important. It is important to sell it when you submit your papers to conferences, journals, and so on for acceptance. You need to sell it when you're defending your thesis in front of somebody. You need to sell it when you're writing some other written sort of treatise, either survey or technical document, to the different kinds of audiences. And you need to be able to go in front of audiences like this and be able to present your work. Okay. So what is this license entailing? That you have mastered the process of doing all of this, right? That means this should be repeatable. It is not a one-off exercise, right? So why is a company going to hire you tomorrow? It is not because you have found a new material, okay? Because just because you found a new material today doesn't mean you will find a new material tomorrow, right? The odds are very low, okay? Why are they hiring you? They are hiring you because you have mastered this process. Because given some other problem tomorrow, you will be able to apply the same set of steps to tackle that problem. So as a faculty member, I have several PhD students. Over 20 years, I have supervised around 20 PhD students. With each student, the topic is different. In fact, with each student, I end up doing a PhD. Right? So every 5 years, I am taking the same process and following it for each of the students. Right? That is what the PhD license is all about. That you have mastered this process and you can apply and repeat this process with whatever problems are given to you tomorrow. Okay? Now, why should you do this? Right? So we saw what a PhD was, but why should you do a PhD? As I was telling to some of the students before this talk, the university life is one of the best periods of a life. Right? You've done with high school, you have come here, you are independent, right? You don't have your parents overseeing you on every step. You are in a carefree environment. You have the freedom to operate, right? That's a very commonly used term in industry. It's called freedom to operate, a very grossly abused term. Freedom to do what you want. You can go to class, you can go, you can go to a movie, you can do this. You don't have a family to care for. All these advantages are there, right? It is best that you use this environment to do things that you would like to do in the real world, right? Because in the real world, there's always a dagger hanging over your head, okay? And it's not clear when that's going to fall. Here, you are in a sandboxed environment, okay? It's going to be, someone is taking care of you, you don't need to worry about all this. This is a time to try out all these things, right? So, the freedom to pick what you want to do and who you want to do it with. That's another interesting issue, right? When you have so many faculty members we can do research with, who do you want to work with? Yes, it should be someone who's working on something which is matching your interests. It's also how you get along with that faculty member, what are the contacts that faculty member has and so on. There is also this excitement, right? As I said, in academic research, people like to work on things just because it's intellectually stimulating. Okay? Even if it has no practical impact, that's fine. Okay? People will appreciate you for intellect for solving these kinds of problems. So when you are in the university, why not do this? Because in the real world, you may not have the opportunity to do this. Right? That's all the more reason for you to stick around, do a PhD, and pursue what is intellectually stimulating for you. Satisfaction. Very often, right? How do you measure impact? In a company, it is about how much extra revenue you are able to bring, how much efficiency you are able to extract, and so on. On the other hand, there is a broader set of impacts that industry may not focus all that much on. For instance, societal impact, right? How do you, target the masses of poor people in India in making, let's say, water affordable, right? Or bringing electricity to the most rural of population, or bringing internet to the remote tribal villages, right? These are very, very impactful things, okay? And these are, you can have a real tangible effect on society. Ecosystem. You all staying in hostels, you have a peer group, you like the group because they all come in the similar whatever Mensa score or JEE score or whatever it is, right? And you vibe with them, right? Why not to leverage that ecosystem longer to continue the kinds of things that you're doing, right? Because once you go in the real world, you have to deal with all kinds of people, right? And it's not a technical issue anymore. Sitting in TCS, I have to deal with things right at the janitorial level to all the way up to the CEO, different spectrums, right? And that's what the real world is about. When you are in a university environment, a lot of these abstractions are taken away from you. Learning, right? Many of us really love learning. Okay? We like to learn about new things. Right? So you learn the investigation process. Remember, that's what I said is research. It's not about knowing, everything. It's picking one thing and digging deeper and deeper into this, right? How to make trade-offs and how to deal with failures. I want to spend a little more time on learning because I feel that, I also got a couple of questions on this before this talk. Learning is like a pyramid, okay? You learn the most when you're just born, right? Because you learn to breathe, you learn to, move your legs, then you start learning to walk, a lot of other things. Now we take that for granted, right? Now as you, did from LKG, you came all the way to 10th standard, you learned a lot of stuff. Then once you come from 10th to 12th, you subsetted what you're learning from, the entire range of topics to science or commerce and so on. Then from there, you came to IIT, now you're confined to engineering. And that is for, let's say, a BTech. After BTech, you go to a PhD, it will be even narrower, right? So you built a pyramid of learning. So later on in life, after you finish your PhD, you will be even more narrow of the pyramid, right? And know that you can have a hard fall if your pyramid is not broad enough. Okay? It's very, very important that you get your fundamentals very thorough. Okay? The later knowledge that gathers is based on these fundamentals. You cannot say, after first year I don't need calculus anymore. Okay? Math 1 and 2, whatever subjects the differentiation and integration was, I'm done, I'll forget it. Okay? Don't do that. Okay? It is going to be needed at some point in your life. Same way, there are a lot of trade-offs and failures that you will have in real life. Okay? You will attempt something and you will fall flat. Instead of doing it in the world, if you do it during your research, you have a sandboxed environment where you learn from that. And you will not make those kinds of mistakes going forward later on. Right? I also have this interesting attribute called show-off. Right? I'm sure many of you would have done wonderfully in school. I also did very well in school. Right? I came to IIT and then found, there are some guys who are better than me. Right? They crack all the exams and there's no way I can beat them. Right? Now this is an opportunity for you to show off those people. Okay? Why? The PhD is not about how intellectually bright you are. It helps. But it is more about creativity and applying yourself. Right? So I have seen a lot of very, very bright students come by and fall flat when they're doing a PhD. Because they're not able to have that creative vibe. Okay? So this is really an opportunity for you to show off. Unconventional. Okay? Note that today to some extent there are these startups and so on that many of you guys are aspiring to, but there's also this whole set of opportunities, little explored, for PhDs in your respective disciplines to get into. Okay? Just think about the kinds of options. What happens if tomorrow, for instance, driverless cars come everywhere, right? What is the consequence of that on the rules and regulations? What's the consequence of that on the legal system? If a car goes and crashes someone, who's responsible? How will they contest this in a court of law? Right? Have you thought about it? They are going to need the researchers who are going to come and explain to them why this happened, who was the cause of this, and so on. Right? Finally, I have a slide because I'm sure you're all waiting for this. Okay? It's monetarily worth it as well. Okay, I want to just keep it as last because I don't want this to be the reason you're doing this. Right? It should be the last reason. This is a consequence. Okay? So what is this? This is some survey from the US government, okay, where they did a lifetime earnings of people in different disciplines for different kinds of degrees that they got. Right? So this is bachelor's, master's, doctorate. Okay? And this is the percentage difference between these two. Note that this is lifetime earnings. So many people may think, why should I spend 5 years of my life or 4 years of my life doing a PhD? I would make more taking a job, and those 4 years salary would make up any difference I get, okay, for the rest of my life. That's not true. Okay, so if you really are convinced only by salary, there are also salary statements which show that there is a monetary difference over the lifespan. Okay, so I see newspapers all the time talking about this person, the topper from this, got a 2 crore salary, 1 crore salary, and so on, right? That may be the first year. 10 years from now, I don't know, right? And it's not clear that other people who do not get that salary at that time, what they got. Okay, so don't try to look at 1 year, 3 years at a time. It doesn't make sense. Okay, you have to look at what are you going to do 10, 20 years from now, right? Are you get a reasonable amount of money to have a comfortable living, and are you going to have the job satisfaction doing what you want to do? So what does it take? I think a couple of minutes I'll finish. What does it take? Be a learning machine. Okay, there's no substitute. Just absorb every piece of knowledge. Don't think that anything is irrelevant for you. Okay, you never know when things will come in useful. That means that you need to learn beyond your domain. Okay, the world is evolving that way. If you think I'm a mechanical engineer, I should just know thermodynamics and that's all I have to do for the rest of my life, the number of opportunities you'll miss out on will be too bad. Okay? Be a team player. Note that the whole is always better than the sum of the parts. Okay? Whether it be in academic environments or in industry, you will be working as teams addressing some bigger problem, right? Each person brings something to the table. So you have to recognize what each person brings and also understand what is your strength in this team and how do you contribute your strengths to this team's overall positive effects. As I already said, be very articulate. This is critical. As I said, many of my students, very good intellectually, they're also reasonable researchers, but they fall short in being able to articulate their overall actions and their ideas. And this is, again, a very important issue. Don't do a PhD just for the sake of doing it, okay? Or to have the 3-letter credential at the end of your name. Okay? You do it because you want to do it and you stay committed to doing it. Forget about everything else. Okay? This is a passion you should have and you should pursue it vigorously, and it will automatically have its rewards, either lucrative or intellectually stimulating rewards. So here are some parting words. Don't succumb to peer and parental pressure. Okay? I have even seen articles which said, my father told me, don't take this job, take that job which is paying more. Okay? You should not be succumbing to a lot of what others are doing. Just because they are doing it doesn't mean it's the best thing for you. Okay? It may be the best thing for them, but it may not be the best thing for you. Don't be swayed by financial issues. Very often financial issues are very short term. Okay? They will be important for the next year, next 2 years and so on. But if you look at the longer scheme of things, 10 years, 20 years from now, it will not matter. Don't take any shortcuts. Even though something takes time and is the right thing to do, take the time to do it. As I said, be thorough in your fundamentals. You never know when you will need them again, and think long term. Okay? With that, I'll take questions.
Thank you, sir, for that interesting and engaging talk. The podium is now open for questions from the audience.
Thank you, Mr. Anand. It was an excellent session. I am just an offbeat question. You must have heard about the personality type by MBTI studies. You must have heard about personality studies, personality types by MBTI, introvert, extrovert. There is a general belief that introverts excel in research, R&D, and not so by the extroverts. Who are you? And then, do you believe in that?
First of all, I don't believe in that.
You don't believe in that. And who are you? How do you classify yourself?
I would call myself an introvert.
Introvert.
Even though I went up in front of this audience to give this talk.
But then you justify that, no? That common belief.
No, I
that,
have had students who are extroverts who have done very well.
I mean, PhDs and inventions,
yes.
innovations.
Yes.
So that's wrong notion.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Hi, sir. So this is about the timeline of doing a PhD. As in, so if, okay, personally, I'm not sure of which topic I want to choose. So background, I'm a dual degree student. I'm going to be in my final year next year. So I want to know if it is required to know your area of interest very well to do a PhD now, or would it be better that you start doing something and then do a PhD?
I think I get asked this question almost on a daily basis. In fact, even yesterday I got 2 emails saying, please speak to my son, he doesn't know what to do. Okay? So, this is my opinion. The opinions can differ widely. When you have a momentum, right, you know Newton's laws, best to keep at it, right? So, right now you have the momentum of education and study, okay? Keep at it, okay? I know many people say, let me take a job for 2-3 years, figure out what to do, and then I'll be more mature and know what to do. Maybe it is not bad, but I don't think it is necessary, okay? And I find many students who just come through that momentum do quite well, and if not better, because they are in line with that way of thinking. Okay, that's point number 1. Then you had this question about how to pick a topic and what to do. So if you look at my research methodology or process that I put down, I said first line was pick a topic or pick a problem, right? There are different ways of doing this. The easiest way is pick some random paper, okay, in some domain, which is written in the last year or so. Don't go to some random conferences and so on. Go to the top of the line journals or conferences. Pick a random paper from that, and very recent, and that is the state of the art in that area, supposed to be. You can go back from that, and you will know everything about that, right? Whether you like it or not is another issue, right? You can always pick those kinds of papers. However, those are the easiest papers to write or easiest research to do. And usually that kind of research is highly incremental, right? Because you are trying to just do one better than someone else. The more fundamental or more well-regarded works are those where people identify the problem. Here is a problem worth solving. Even if you don't solve it, I think you should get much more credit for the identifying the problem than even solving it. Follow? Yeah. How do you identify? Moonshots. So it is not easy. It takes a while, and as a person who is starting off, it's not easy, right? So it takes a lot of discussion. So that's why I always think that in the first year of a PhD thesis, don't think that you will accomplish anything, right? It is all about getting to know other people, getting to know subjects, thinking deeply about things. It's like a year of philosophy. Yeah. Yes.
Sir, I'm a first year student. So when you said think long term, like 20 to 30 years, when should that start happening?
Now.
Okay, and what are the chances that like you will remain committed to that for so long? There are a number of
No, no,
things
no.
that can come in
See,
your way.
just because you think long term doesn't mean that for the next 20 years you're going to think about the same thing, right? You should have a long term perspective. You try to work towards it, but along the way there will be a lot of path changes. Okay, it doesn't mean that this is the one fixated thing that I'm going to do and nothing else. Okay, it's not that way. You have to make adaptive decisions all along the way, but you should have a longer term perspective. Don't try to do something just for the next 1 year or 2 years. Okay, that's just not going to give you the right perspective in terms of what your career options should be.
So you're talking about like these MOOCs like Coursera and Udacity changing the way that, and you also question the existence of universities after 10 or 20 years. So what will be the role of a person who's interested in academia after, say, universities?
What's the role of academia?
A person interested in academia, like how will they be supported? In this case, the professors are also teaching.
So this is another thing that you have to think with your creative minds. What is a university going to look like 20 years from now or 50 years from now, right? See, first thing is real estate, right? Look at the amount of real estate that's needed to run a university, physical university, all the support infrastructure and so on. It's a lot of cost, and especially in the foreign countries, it's a tremendous cost, right? On the other hand, with online models, things are affordable for everyone, right? It's not just the select few. So that is point number one. Second, note that today there is nothing confining to you to learn subject A from Professor X, right? Just because you are at IIT and Professor X is teaching subject A, in my time I had to go and listen to that. Today you are not confined to do that, right? You can go to MIT's edX or Coursera's same subject, sit in your dorm room and learn the subject, right? So you can get the lectures from the very best of people. So what is the purpose of the university? It is more to ensure you know that concept, right? So over time, universities become almost like exam centers, right? Because information will come from a lot of different places that you can gather. It will be a way of evaluating whether you learned it or not, because that today is not quite there, right? I mean, you can get a certificate from Coursera which says you have gone through this course, but that doesn't mean anything, right? Someone has to really come and give you another exam to see how much you really understood. Okay? So, there are people who are actually working on how to come up with very interesting evaluation mechanisms, right? So even as you watch these videos and materials online, they are trying to look at your eye movements and some neurological pulses to see how much comprehension has happened, things like that. Okay, that's really far-fetched. There are hybrid mechanisms that many universities are trying now. So even though there is, it is online, you still have live access. Yes. So there are people who are actually using Twitter and other kinds of things, using this mechanism to ask questions and get answers.
Hi, sir. I have a question. I have two questions. First one, how does one pick an advisor for PhD? The second one is, do you pick a very reputed advisor at a not so decent university or a not so reputed advisor at the top-notch university?
Okay, let me draw this analogy. How do you pick a spouse? If I ask you that question, you can have a forced marriage, or arranged marriage, or you can have a love marriage, right? The problem is you don't have this courtship opportunity to figure out whether you want this love marriage or not, right? So very often, right, you should, by the 4th year, you should have a vague idea. I'm not talking about the problem like what she was asking. I'm talking about the kind of areas that you like to work in, right? And in those areas, find which are the universities which have, don't go by ranking, okay? Which are the universities which, in fact, the way I have started doing this now is there are tools now. You pick the area and go to the top conferences or journals in that area and see in the last 10 years who has published the most in those, right? And once you do that, you know which universities are good and who are the faculty in those schools that I want to go to, right? It doesn't matter whether they are young, old, not. You know they are productive, right? That's what is most important, because they should have the energy to work with you. If they're going to be very laid back and say, you do what you want, it's not someone you want to work with.
Last question.
Hello. So you spoke about the learning pyramid. There's one problem that I've been facing. I've been a teacher. I'm a 5th year PhD student here, and before I came for my PhD, I've been a teacher. While teaching,
A round of applause to you. Very few of PhDs in campus area.
while teaching, I like my level of understanding of the subject or whatever I taught was at a certain level. Now I listen to the lectures of the subjects like 3-4 times, and I still never get that level of understanding that I had when I taught a subject. So,
Perfect. I think every teacher would agree with you, right? In fact, what I do these days, if I want to learn a new topic, I offer a course on it. I don't know anything about it. So I have to learn about it before I teach, right? So it makes you very thorough. So every semester I offer a special topics course on something which I don't know anything about. So it makes you automatically want to learn. And you become very thorough, and the more questions you get, the more thorough you become. So in fact, even in your dorms, what you guys should do is lecture to your friends, right? It's not a bad idea, and you can take turns and so on. That way you will actually get your material thorough.
I once again thank you, sir, for spending your valuable time with us. Now I request Dean INAR, Professor R. Nagarajan, to present the speaker with token of gratitude. Thank you everyone for attending this LLS.